The mid-20th century was a pivotal period for organized crime in the United States. The U.S. government, increasingly alarmed by the growing influence and power of the Mafia, began to intensify its efforts to crack down on organized crime. One of the most significant developments in the U.S. government's efforts to combat organized crime was the Kefauver hearings. The hearings began in 1950 and exposed the deep roots of organized crime in American society. The televised hearings brought the Mafia's activities into the public spotlight, with an estimated 30 million Americans tuning in live, revealing the extent of their influence over businesses, labor unions, and even local governments. With the mob feeling more scrutiny, this would be one of the biggest factors that led them to taking their operations to the Caribbean, setting up an island for their criminal network, and being a catalyst that started one of the biggest conflicts in American history.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
The story of the Havana Riviera begins with Meyer Lansky, a notorious figure in American organized crime. Lansky, often referred to as the mob's accountant, was a key architect of the American Mafia's financial empire. He saw Havana as an ideal location for expanding the Mafia's reach, particularly in the lucrative gambling industry. During the 1940s and 1950s, Havana was already a thriving hub for tourism, drawing wealthy Americans who were eager to indulge in its casinos, nightclubs, and beaches. Cuba's proximity to the United States and its relatively lax laws on gambling made it an attractive destination for mobsters like Lansky. The Havana Riviera quickly became the epicenter of Havana's high society, attracting celebrities, politicians, and wealthy tourists from around the world. The casino floor was filled with high rollers, while the hotel hosted glamorous events and performances by top entertainers. However, beneath this veneer of luxury lay the darker operations of the American Mafia. Lansky's investment in the Havana Riviera was not just about creating a successful business, it was also about establishing a powerful foothold in Cuba's burgeoning gambling industry. Lansky and his associates in the Mafia saw the Havana Riviera as a prime location for laundering money generated from their illicit activities in the United States. The casino's operations provided a perfect cover for these activities, allowing the Mafia to clean dirty money by mixing it with the legitimate revenue from the casino's profits. In addition to money laundering, the Havana Riviera played a role in the broader criminal network that Lansky and other mobsters had established in Cuba. This network included other casinos, hotels, and nightclubs across Havana, all of which contributed to the Mafia's control over the city's entertainment industry. The Cuban government, under the leadership of President Fulgencio Batista, was complicit in this arrangement. Batista's regime received substantial kickbacks from the Mafia in exchange for turning a blind eye to their activities and ensuring that the gambling operations remained unregulated. The late 1950s marked the peak of Havana's golden age, a period when the city was known as the Paris of the Caribbean. The Havana Riviera, along with other Mafia-run establishments, was at the heart of this vibrant scene. The revenue generated by the casino industry was staggering. Estimates suggest that the casino alone could have brought in tens of millions of dollars annually during its peak years, and roughly $6 million per month. The success of the Havana Riviera and its counterparts had a significant impact on the Cuban economy, particularly in the capital. The influx of foreign currency helped to boost local businesses, and the construction of luxury hotels and casinos created jobs for many Cubans. However, this prosperity was largely confined to Havana and a few other tourist hotspots. The majority of the Cuban population, particularly in rural areas, saw little benefit from the booming tourism industry. Instead, they faced poverty, unemployment, and social inequality, which fueled growing discontent with Batista's government. The Mafia's influence in Cuba also had a corrupting effect on the country's political and legal systems. The widespread bribery and collusion between the Mafia and Cuban officials undermined the rule of law and contributed to the perception that the government was more interested in serving foreign interests than in addressing the needs of its own people. And just like that, in a blink of an eye, the party was over.
Havana, often the mecca for gamblers, sees the jackpot payoff of a political longshot. Bearing 26th of July banners, joyous followers of Fidel Castro sweep triumphantly through the Cuban capital hours after their rebellion had toppled the regime of Fulgencio Batista.
Would you like to see gambling stopped altogether? Of course. No casinos.
Well, the casino, not casino for the Cuban people.
Just for tourists?
Only for tourists if the government is agree with that.
The Mafia's golden era in Cuba came to an abrupt end with the Cuban Revolution. As Fidel Castro's revolutionary forces gained momentum in the late 1950s, the Mafia began to realize that their operations in Havana were in jeopardy. The revolution, driven by widespread discontent with Batista's corrupt regime, culminated in Batista being overthrown on January 1st, 1959. One of Castro's first actions as the new leader of Cuba was to nationalize the country's casinos and luxury hotels. The Havana Riviera, along with other Mafia-controlled establishments, was seized by the government, and the casino was shut down. The Mafia's investments in Cuba were effectively wiped out overnight, marking the end of their influence in the country. The closure of the Havana Riviera's casino marked the end of an era for Havana. The city's glamorous reputation quickly faded as the new communist government implemented sweeping social and economic reforms. Tourism declined sharply, and the luxury hotels and casinos that had once defined Havana's skyline fell into disrepair. The Havana Riviera, once a jewel in the Mafia's crown, now stands as a reminder of a lost era, its story etched into the fabric of Cuban history. And as far as the Mafia, they would continue to grow their empire for the next 40 years, accepting what happened in Cuba as business.
How did you evade the feds? Like, how did you and your business associates become so successful under the scrutiny of the government?
The way any legitimate company does. We were making more money than some Fortune 500 companies.